Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome to the November meeting of the Housing Planning and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. If you bear with me while I read the apologies. This month we have apologies from Councillor Abdullah, Gunther, Preston, Wilson, Glover, Winstanley and Booth. And a particular thank you to our 4 substitutes who are joining us this evening. Councillor Peter Davis from Oldham, Councillor Ray Dutton from Rochdale, Tanya Birch from Salford and Bernard Sharp from Trafford. Thank you very much indeed. And we are quorate. Chair's announcements and urgent business. I'm going to start by introducing those of you who don't know to Anne Morgan and Paul Dennett, who are at this end of the table. We've got an update note that you should have all received on the GMSF, which you will have all read, I'm sure. And Anne and Paul are here to answer any questions you may have. Why don't I invite them? Anne, why don't you give us the 2-minute version of what's in the note? Well, I'm just still slightly bruised from Mayor Dennett's last performance, where a 2-minute cut-off would have been cruel and unusual punishment, I think, because he was just getting into his flow around that time. So, Anne, if you could just let us know where we're up to in this update, because this is a really important issue for this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. What you have before you is just a note on the government consultation on local housing need methodology, which sounds quite dull, but actually is the methodology that underpins the housing figures that will appear in the next Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, so is really, really quite important. We've been waiting for this for some time. Government signalled their intent in July that they were about to publish a consultation, came out at the end of October. One of the reasons government did it was that we had the new household and population projections last year, which were lower than anticipated, and they were concerned that that would lead to a lower housing figure than the figure they felt they needed, and which is the 300,000 that appeared in, I think, the budget in 2017. What the consultation says is actually ignore the latest household population projections and actually use the 2014 methodology, which gives us a very, very similar figure to the one we'd already been working on. So what we are looking at now is the consultation ends on December the 7th. We're considering what our response to that will be, but we just wanted you to know, because it's such an important building block of GMSF, we wanted you to know that it was out and just to have that update. This all happened at the end of October, which is why leaders then took the decision to not go out at the end of November, because we needed to understand the implications of this, and we'll be taking a decision over the next couple of months about when we do go out for consultation, but it's likely to be December or January.
Thank you very much indeed for that. So the 300,000 was a Conservative Party manifesto pledge, and they're sticking to it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from any of the members who will have all read and digested the note? So you talked about there's going to be a consultation response from the Combined Authority, which you're working on at the moment. I'm looking at both of you at the moment on this. Can you give us a flavour of what might be in that, in terms of delighted to stick with the 300,000 national figure, slightly disappointed that just because the numbers don't match what the government were hoping they would match, we'll go for some different numbers?
So if you look at the paper, what ultimately this means for Greater Manchester is over the spatial framework plan, so up until 2037, Greater Manchester will be required under this methodology to deliver 211,660 homes. And if you look at what that means nationally for the government, it means that they'll be delivering under this methodology 269,000 homes, which you'll recognise is short of the manifesto target of 300,000 homes per year. So the question is how is the government going to get from the current figure of 269 to 300,000? And there is a bit of a note in the paper that actually highlights how they're going to do that. Well, they're going to enter into housing deals, and they're going to do things in places like Cambridge, Milton Keynes and Oxford, where, interestingly, the National Infrastructure Commission has talked about delivering 1 million homes, I think, between now and 2050. So that's how the government are going to deliver it. It's by entering into housing deals up and down the country. to meet their manifesto commitment target of 300,000 homes per year. What the information is telling us and the methodology is telling us in Greater Manchester is our target is 211,660, which breaks down to 10,583 per annum. So that's how it'll work. We hope.
So a decision will be taken by the Combined Authority at its next meeting. That's the plan, to go out to consultation either in December or January, I think you said, Anne. Okay. So sorry, you were nodding there. As a member, I'm sure members around this table some will have green belt in their wards, others will certainly have green belt in their boroughs. Not certainly, actually. Let's get on with doing what we're going to do, I think, because the uncertainty is really unsettling for residents who are thinking, who want to know where this is going and who want to know what's happening. So that would be my encouragement, that we've talked about this for quite a long time and delaying and delaying and delaying. For reasons I think residents do understand, but I know that the longer the uncertainty drags on, the less helpful that uncertainty is, I think. Please do.
Yeah, no, I accept the point you're making there, and it's been a frustration certainly on my part, and I think the team's part here at the Combined Authority, that we've actually had to delay, you know, going out to the second consultation on the spatial framework. It's not something we wanted to do, but it's something that we strongly feel is prudentially the right thing to do, if I'm being honest with everyone in this room, and also for the people of Greater Manchester, because fundamentally we want to do proper strategic planning here within Greater Manchester that genuinely has a robust methodology that underpins it and delivers the right number of homes in the right places across Greater Manchester, whilst also protecting our green infrastructure and also greening Greater Manchester through this. This is a spatial plan not just to deliver housing numbers, this is a spatial plan for the next, you know, nearly 20 years for Greater Manchester. And getting this right is absolutely critical to what we do in terms of homes, communities, jobs, neighbourhoods, and also the environment. So we're very much committed to that. It's just unfortunate that all of this has come to a standstill because of national data sets and methodologies that, you know, don't really deliver in the interests of the people of this country at the moment. So we've unfortunately been caught in a bit of a mess, I would argue. So, but it's the right thing to do, is to delay and get on with it.
Mess being something of a theme of the day, perhaps. Any questions or comments, or shall we thank our visitors and move on? Thank you both very much indeed. Okay, any declarations of interest? Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Is it your wish that we agree those as a true record? Thank you very much. Okay, we've got bus reform update. And I'm looking at, we have three people, sorry. We've got Michael Renshaw, we've got Simon Warburton, we've got Rod Fawcett here. And we've budgeted in around about half an hour for this item in total. So perhaps you could introduce it up to 10 minutes, because of course members will have read the papers. So up to 10 minutes, and then we'll have questions, I'm sure. Thank you.
So for once, I think I'll probably will probably delight you in terms of being briefer than that. We're mindful of the fact that it's some time since we came and presented a paper to the committee. The paper itself sets off by giving you an update and of the process that we're currently going through to produce an assessment. That assessment includes analysis of operator information, which since we last reported, we've done a considerable amount of further work on, and it's fair to say that assessment process is now well developed. We reported to the CA in the summer, and the report sets out the approvals we got from the CA in respect to specific things in terms of preparing for some of the next stages ahead, which included actively setting off to seek to secure the services of an auditor to prepare us for that stage, and also in terms of starting to prepare work for any subsequent consultation. So that work is progressing. The report sets out and includes an appendices which effectively sets out, we hope quite clearly, the stages at which we will progressively progress through to a consultation, potentially subject to CA approval. It also sets out, obviously for your thoughts, the process in terms of what may be subsequent stages in terms of coming back to this committee and engaging you, and particularly, I think, in the area around in advance of any consultation. Our next, shall we say, milestone or stage to the CA will be to go back and confirm that the assessment is complete and seek their approval for the auditor to be effectively appointed and to commence work. We're clearly quite sensitive about the fact that we are the first people using this legislation, and therefore we are, it may frustrate members at times, but we are seeking to be very prudent and cautious in terms of the way we're progressing. And in that respect, obviously, for instance, the auditor cannot commence work until the assessment's complete, so that there's no potential risk of challenge around the fact of whether that auditor has influenced our thinking in finalising the assessment. So, more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. So 2 questions from me. One is, can you just flesh out a little bit more about the progress that has been made since the last time this item came before this committee? And why don't you answer that, and then I'll ask my second question.
So that's primarily been about effectively updating the preliminary work that we'd done in advance of receiving operator information. So since we last saw yourself and produced the report, by that stage we'd started to receive operator information. We've now received a considerable amount of it, and the process that we've been going through is to ensure that our assessment takes account of that data, particularly in the context of the modelling work. As part of that modelling work, we also are under an obligation to use the most up-to-date information. And clearly, given the timescales that have evolved over the time, there is some work around updating some of that base data. And that is one of the aspects that the audit in due course will validate, that we've used all available and up-to-date information. So that's really been the central aspect of the work we've been doing since.
So taking on board the point that you made about Greater Manchester being the first to use this legislation, and I also take on board the point that it says members can expect an update before any decision is taken by the GMCA, which I'm sure this committee would welcome. And I would imagine it's difficult to be precise about timing, but if you could give us a range when we might expect more progress. So are we talking months or years or decades, or where are we on this?
I think it would be fair to say that the committee will have a more active or more material to consider during the course of next year. We're talking months and activity in next year. So appreciate this year's been quite quiet, but I think that situation will change. The other thing I should have said in terms of what we've been doing also is, obviously when we last met you, we were already engaged with the operators, and we've continued to engage with them about alternatives. And one of the tests we've got to pass in terms of the assessment is to actually take account of other alternates as part of that assessment, and that work continues and that dialogue continues.
Councillor Dutton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me for asking this question, Chair, but being a substitute member, obviously I've not been privy to most of the information. But could you tell me what the goal and vision is of this report?
So, as I said at the start, I think from this report specifically is just to really give you reassurance that it's some time ago since we presented a paper, and I think this will be the third time that we've presented a paper to the committee. The first time was quite a background piece around the way in which bus services are provided in Greater Manchester, and that was done, if I remember rightly, about 14 months ago. So I suppose this tries to find the balance of the fact that you've had a number of months of silence from us. We're not yet at a stage where there's frankly anything material for us to bring to you for you to consider. But we were anxious, and I think the Chair also, that we don't just go completely silent on you, and that silence leaves people not clear. What is the process? Where are we going? Are we indeed even still progressing this? So that was purely the intention of this report, and from that perspective, you know, my hope was that it just assured members of this committee that we are not seeking to circumvent this committee. We're not seeking to wait to be dragged or pulled or requested to attend. You know, it's healthy, isn't it, to just give you a very brief heads up. For some members, I trust it reinforces or reminds them of the process that we've got to go through. And this is a very prescriptive process in the legislation.
So just to add to Michael's comments there, I was keen that an update came before this committee, because we have heard about bus reform being part of the work that's being undertaken at TFGM. In terms of devolution and mayoral powers, this is actually quite a big one that the mayor has, and there will be a decision for the mayor to take, which Michael's talked about. He was exactly right in saying we just didn't want radio silence, where we heard about bus reform. In fact, was it our first meeting? I think it was our very first meeting, where we had a big presentation about bus reform, and then we've had other updates, but I just didn't want, or we didn't want the committee to have a silence where it should have been filled with information. So that's it. Any other questions? Councillor Sharp, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Likewise, with my colleague, I'm a substitute member. Maybe a little different because I actually haven't read the papers. Well, it's finding the time. However, just as I'm thinking about it, in terms of working out, presumably, routes, modelling and things of that nature, what do we do if we have a district which is the word coterminous with another authority which is not in Greater Manchester? I can think of my Trafford as an example. We're virtually at the end, and we're not very far away from Cheshire East, because Wimslow, not over there. So there's a sort of relationship required between ourselves and presumably somebody else in managing the right sort of model. Because I notice, again with Trafford, as the bus leaves Trafford and goes, for example, to Warrington, which is a different borough altogether, there is a section of that which really is in Trafford, and people do use it. So I presume some money is appropriated to that. There may be a sharing arrangement. Is this too early at this stage to consider this sort of thing? Well, I think Salford, for example, hasn't got a coterminous with anybody else. I think it's all Salford. Maybe I'm wrong with that, I don't know.
Just very briefly, there's probably two things there, and I won't get distracted into the current here and now, but across the whole of Greater Manchester, we've got a whole series of cross-boundary services we'd describe them. Some of those are run commercially, wholly commercially, and others are frankly sponsored by either us or our neighbour or both of us. And we are in constant dialogue with the neighbouring LTAs about those services. In the context of the Bus Services Act, though, and the guidance, it's very clear that in producing our assessment, we have to take account of the impact on our neighbouring LTAs. And to that end, ever since we started this process, at officer level, we've had a whole series of meetings systematically with the neighbouring LTAs. And also in that context, if and when we were ever to introduce franchising, there is a whole mechanism for cross-boundary operators or services to effectively seek permits from us to continue to operate. And we have a range of provisions that would allow us to apply conditions to those services. So from that perspective, we've always approached this on the basis that we need to assess that range of services. The intention is to explore how those services in broad terms, continue to operate and function, serve a very useful purpose and valuable purpose to both the neighbouring authority and ourselves in terms of travel to work, etc. So there's a whole mechanism around that, and they're not overlooked, and they will feature as part of the assessment and indeed as part of the consultation process. So when we get to that stage, I think it is a sort of subset of the whole discussion.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this item? We look forward to see. Oh, sorry, Councillor Davis, go ahead.
Just say part of the process. Will it be? It'll be part of the negotiations that you're looking at with companies that are going to provide new vehicles, because the age of the fleets at the moment, they seem to be getting very old to me.
So in terms of the here and now, we're absolutely conscious of the fact that the average fleet age is deteriorating in Greater Manchester. As a subject in itself, it's not a, how would I describe it without being dismissive about it, it doesn't become a material component of the assessment, because the assessment primarily looks at what are the outcomes of different regimes or arrangements for the provision of services. In a franchise world, of course, the combined authority would have a lot stronger influence at prescribing and shaping the fleet age. So in that context, it becomes a relative component, but we've not set out to sort of make that a primary objective, because, of course, whether it's through any regulatory arrangement or frankly through other interventions, so things like Green Bus Fund historically, and also more recently in terms of ultra-low emission bids, those sorts of opportunities to find funding would prevail, whether it was a franchise model or a deregulated model. However, we absolutely recognise at this moment in time the fleet age in Greater Manchester is deteriorating. It's more pronounced with some operators than others, so it's not necessarily a complete generalisation, but in aggregate it is declining, and that's irrespective of the franchising stroke reform exercise continues to be a concern to us, and frankly will become a relevant component to the issues of clean air and the like. So it's absolutely recognised by us.
Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, but quick answers will do, thank you. Just wondering if suddenly we had general elections, how the consultation, the whole process is general election proof, because we're not going into any detail, but for obvious reasons, there would be a lot of changes introduced very quickly, potentially. And also a more local question. The consultation will be, I believe, the third stage. At the third stage, the authority consults on its proposed scheme, which includes both assessment and audit report. My concern is that people who are not IT savvy, and I'm thinking about neat young people and what we call hidden young people. We don't even know who they are, where they are. They're not even claiming benefits. They're just completely disengaged with us. I'm just wondering, how are we going to reach them? Because I'm just thinking, I'm a councillor in Odsall and in Langworthy, which is about 1.5 miles where the connections office is, and neat young people and young people who are not connecting with us. They are struggling to walk that distance. I know, and I'm sure we all have encountered that. And when we had a briefing at our council regarding the Transport for Greater Manchester, especially the bus route, it took me such a long time to say, I know it's 1.5 miles, but it will transform somebody's life if they can jump on the bus and get to the connections office, get advice, obviously help with employment training and that. And it took me a while to get through to explain that I understand not many people, this route doesn't carry a lot of people to work and back, but a lot of these young people cause so much, take so much time, effort, committing crime and etc., that it would be worthwhile to pay attention to those small local issues. That this 1.5 miles is really insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but locally it would literally transform lives. So one, how do we engage with these young people to even get some understanding of what would be helpful to them? Not just young people, but those who are the most vulnerable, possibly less IT savvy. How do we get their opinion, and how do we make sure that those small routes are taken into the consideration?
So just quickly to attempt to answer both. Clearly, well, certainly it would be a bold officer who starts to speculate about the timing or potential outcomes of any general election. So I'll avoid that one. But in the context of the process itself, I mean, frankly, this is based on legislation, established legislation and established guidance. And from that perspective, clearly it becomes, should we say, matters for the CA in terms of the process and the speed at which that process goes once the assessment's completed, but I won't envisage any material change in the context of the impact of that. In terms of the broader point you raise, which is about the issue of ensuring that the consultation reaches as deeply and as far as we can potentially achieve. The starting point for us, of course, is that we would recognise that bus is a very significant aspect of many people's lives and has a significant role to play in Greater Manchester. And indeed, part of this debate is how does it play a more significant role? So from that perspective, it's absolutely in our mind that consultation needs to be as wholesome and broad as we can possibly achieve. Now, ultimately, that becomes a practical issue in the context of the method and extent. The report talks about the gunning principles. We're very clear that we've got to demonstrate, if and when we reach that stage, that we've made every attempt to have a deep and meaningful engagement. So, and as we've suggested in the report, I think that is where, at a subsequent opportunity, we're more than happy if the committee wishes for us to come and have a very specific dialogue with this committee about the proposed form of any consultation, so that there's opportunity for yourselves to effectively either endorse or influence that in its full extent. So without I'm not trying to avoid an ultimate question today, but we absolutely get the fact that this needs to be as full a consultation as possible, and that's and that is extremely understood by us and is crucial to the process, to be honest.
Well, I think we'll accept the offer. Councillor Whittam, please.
Yeah, it was a follow on that, really, to that kind of that level of engagement that you're looking for. Just hopefully a straightforward question. Do you have a sense of what good looks like in terms of that level of engagement, and kind of do you have targets and measures that you've got in mind that would give you a sense that you had engaged with all parts of the community and all parts of the region?
So I think we'd, again, as part of bringing back, I think we'd bring that along in the sense of to give you comfort that we'd shaped a proposed programme with clear targets in terms of what we're aiming to achieve. Clearly, can't guarantee the level of response, but you can certainly guarantee the type of impact that different forms of engagement will achieve.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, so I think the committee would very much like to accept that offer, because consultation is a topic that comes up at this committee quite often. We know the people who are able to respond and who always do respond, and they're not necessarily the people who should be responding as much as we need, particularly with something like this. So thank you very much indeed for that. I think it was a useful update, and we look forward to welcoming you back when the next appropriate time might be. Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Robinson. Can you use your mic?
I've normally got a bigger voice normally. I'm normally going on about the Metro link in Bury every time I come to this meeting. Would you believe it? The last time I left here, it was all actually working. First time in over a year.
Can we make sure that's fully minuted, please,
yes,
Emma? Thank you very much.
The escalator and the lift are both working.
I would leave quickly, officers from TFGM, and take that one with the spirit it was meant. Okay, item 6, Greater Manchester Strategy Implementation Plan and Performance Dashboard Update. We are joined by Amy Foots and the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Do you want to introduce the reports? This committee is focusing on priorities 5, 6 and 7. You should assume that all members have thoroughly read the papers, apart from Councillor Sharp, who already has said he hasn't read his papers. So please, if you want to pick out particular highlights, 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'm 100% sure the committee will have questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I recognise 18 months into this this role, because it is the halfway point, that attention is legitimately turning to, well, okay, maybe he says some good things, but can they deliver? And I think that's a legitimate challenge, and it's something that the people who are in this building need to rise to that challenge. And we asked for devolution in Greater Manchester. The onus is on me and all of us to show that we can use it and deliver real changes that make a difference to the people who live here. Not to get drawn into all of the politics of the day, but I think I noticed something interesting going on, which is the more that national politics has turned in and become quite dysfunctional, the more that people are kind of placing hope in what we're trying to do. And it's not just people who live here, by the way. You know, I often hear people commenting from other parts of the country. I hope you can do something, because then we can, you know, and I think people see it as a way of hopefully building a kind of better approach to politics than the one that we've had. And you know, the thing that I always describe to people when they ask me, well, what's the difference between Westminster and here? It's simple, really. I mean, when you're in the Westminster system, it's all about division and argument and point scoring, you know, because that's the way it's set up. When you're in the role that I'm in, it's all about place. All of our political differences around this table, we all believe in the place, don't we? And we all believe in the people of this place. And therefore, it's a unifying agenda by definition. And I think that's kind of what the country needs a bit more of right now. Things that bring people together, things that kind of people can get behind. And you know, there is strong public support for devolution. It's strong across the country, but it's particularly strong here. So I hope people have a sense that it's beginning to work and it's beginning to deliver. But I want you to hold me to account, and I want to make it quite easy for you to hold us to account, but actually through you, the public being able to hold us to account. So this implementation plan and this dashboard is intended to give clarity on those key measures that we're saying we're going to try and move. And the way in which this is constructed, this plan and this dashboard, which is the common word, phrase that you'll have heard for things of this kind, it's not about nitpicking millions of tiny sort of things. It's about saying, what are the interventions that if we do move the figures on them will make the most difference? So for instance, school readiness, you know, it's been chosen carefully because it links the early years professionals with education professionals. It's an indicator that can hopefully bring people together. And if you made a difference there, you know you're making quite a big difference then when it comes to young people's lives. So that's the way it's done, you know, in kind of simple, clear information on the things that most matter, and not obviously the things that I made commitments on when I stood. And also, they're things which are often designed around the whole GM system. So not just one bit, you know, one public body or one council. You know, it's about big objectives that kind of involve more than one organisation, and tries to give a very clear milestone that we can we can be judged against. So, you know, we're more, you know, we want to hear views on the plan and the way it's presented, but then particularly on those priorities 5, 6 and 7, which are of most interest to the committee. Let me just say something about the actual progress in those areas, Chair, if that would be helpful. And progress and transport don't go together much at the moment, do they? So that's probably not a good way into that particular discussion. And I think we all recognise that it's tough out there. I think the things that are causing most difficulty, though, are not directly under our control. You've just had a long discussion about the bus system. Roads are more under our control. And I think there is a legitimate debate to be had about how do we improve coordination between districts and TFGM and Highways England to make the coordination of roadworks work better. I do think tackling congestion is becoming a reputational issue for us. You know, if word gets out that it's a difficult place to get around, it's not necessarily the best message for potential investors to hear. So we do need to, you know, measure ourselves on our ability to tackle it. But let's be candid to ourselves. The bits that we do run, Councillor Robinson just mentioned Metrolink. Well, Metrolink's had its moments, as you'll all know, in recent times. But when I came in, having challenged them a bit and having pushed TFGM to deliver a more regular performance regime, monitoring regime around Metrolink. I'm going to touch wood here because, you know, I'm tempting fate, but Metrolink has been performing well, really, for the majority of this year. It's carrying a huge number of passengers now. It has actually picked up some of the railway disaffection. Some passengers, having left the rail, have come on to Metrolink. And that is a success story, as is the guided busway, which TFGM, and some of those projects are about beginning this pathway towards integration. And so what we're trying to do, obviously, here is set out the high-level things that we're trying to achieve. Now, obviously, you've got to then get into the detailed indicators that sit beneath them. But I think as I sit here 18 months into the job, transport is our collective biggest challenge, it feels to me. It is the thing that could hold Greater Manchester back if we don't get more of a grip on it. We don't have the powers that London has to run the system. We don't have power over the railways, as I've just said. We can't regulate the number of taxis on our road, or indeed the quality of those vehicles. We haven't yet fully got the order through Parliament that allows us to start to regulate the buses. We can't enforce the yellow box junctions on the roads because Parliament has never given us permission to do that from a civil point of view. You can from a police point of view, but not from a civil point of view. We can't impose restrictions on roadworks through lane rental like London can do. And all of these things are the things that we need. So in some ways, while I'm happy to be held to account, I do also need your support in saying Greater Manchester needs the same as what London has got. You know, if these indicators aren't moving, it won't necessarily mean that it's all our fault. And I just think it's important to say that. To move on to housing. Obviously, I'm going to pick out item 6.4 on the grid. A coordinated, consistent, effective GM-wide response to end the need for rough sleeping. You'll all recall, I mean, the way the debate has changed on this issue. It became the issue of the mayoral campaign. And for that reason, has become the test, really, I think, of devolution. Because people will say, you know, if you can't deal with the biggest crisis that's right in front of us, how can we believe that you've got plans to deal with everything else? You know, if you can't do something about that, if you can't look after people better than that, then, you know, why else should we believe that you can do anything else? So, you know, you'll know that I've devoted a considerable amount of my time and energy to developing what it says there, a coordinated, consistent, effective response. 6 months ago, I couldn't have sat before you and said, we've now got that. But it's green for a reason. We have got that now. we've got a response that is thought through at every level, in terms of reducing homelessness, giving respite to those who are homeless, helping them recover from their problems, and then reconnecting them. We call it the 4 R's, reducing, respite, recovery, reconnection. Councillor Robinson has been at some of our homelessness action network meetings where we have developed this strategy with the voluntary sector. In each case now, there are new interventions that we've got. So obviously the Homelessness Reduction Act has improved our efforts around sharing of data to prevent homelessness happening in the first place. Respite, well, you'll be aware of the Bed Every Night scheme that we've launched, based on our learning from last winter, where we opened emergency accommodation every time the temperature went below freezing. What we found was that that was no good, really, to the people who were going into the shelters, but also the organisations running them. In one night, out another, in one night. You can't move on in life if your basic needs aren't being met. You've got to give people that basic stability so that they then can embrace maybe moving forward. So I think Manchester City Council were probably the first to recognise this in their manifesto at the local elections, where they kind of made that commitment that we should move to a bed every night. And it was very much the feedback we were getting through all the voluntary organisations, that if we could do it, we should do it. And we've made the commitment to do it, partly helped by support from the business community and the captain of Manchester City Football Club. And we've launched a bed every night. And I am so grateful, actually, to all of the districts represented around this table for helping us. Because just from a human point of view, it's the right thing to do. The latest figures are that 135 people are now in accommodation that weren't in accommodation 2 weeks ago. So they're in off the streets. We already have cases, one from Trafford springs to mind, where people have been rehoused through a bed every night. So it's already moving people through. So we think it's beginning to work. So that's the respite bit. The recovery bit, we're about to place our contract for Housing First. So we have £8 million from the government to create 400 homes plus support. So there's then a place to refer people on from the respite provision. The bit where we're weakest in the strategy, to be honest with you, is the reconnection side of things. How do we create enough supported jobs where employers are agreeing to accept people who've been recently homeless, and then give them the time to make progress and hold the job down? That's the R we need to focus on more. I think it's green fairly, because I think we are making massive progress. But I think if I was to challenge myself, I think we need to go further there. There are other issues I could touch on, but maybe we could pick some of those up in questions without wanting to speak too long. And then if I just turn then to priority 7, a green city region and high quality culture and leisure offer. It's a pretty good picture, and I think for good reason, because of the work that Mark Atherton and his team have done on the green agenda. All of the focus that came with the Green Summit earlier this year, all of the energy that's then carried on as we build towards the next summit next year. That's really beginning to pay dividends. Just trying to look through my indicators, so I've got them all there. That work is going to feed into the industrial strategy, and you'll see some reference to that in the indicators. On safety, that remains a big question in terms of public safety. But that's priority 8, but it does touch on this whole question about people's quality of life and safety. We've got a nighttime economy advisor now who is working with our cultural venues, working with all of our town centres to improve that side of how we're organising things. We have obviously the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which I'm happy to touch on if colleagues want to talk about it, which is seeing if we can not just obviously reduce the take from Greenbelt, but enhance the green space that we're keeping. That too is good work in progress. It's still a challenging process. I think that's known by all of you around the table, but we've got good progress to report there. Obviously, there are things that are amber. More than happy to be pulled up on things where you think things aren't going as well as they should be going. You know, I'm not going to sit here tonight and say we've cracked everything, it's all perfect. It's early days. You know, we're all on a big journey together. There are things that this building can do differently and work differently with districts. There is more I can do to engage you as members in the work that we're doing. You know, I accept all of that. But I think as we really bed this performance system down, I think we then can kind of go up to a new level then in terms of how we involve people in making all of these worthy actions a reality. So I hope that's useful, and thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think the first thing I want to say is that the format of this report is really accessible and really easy to read. So thank you to the team who put it together. The language used is also accessible so that people who don't necessarily spend all their working life in this building can understand what it says. My first question is about rough sleeping, which probably won't be a surprise. And one of your pledges in the campaign was to end rough sleeping. Yep. The objectives in here are steps towards that. Can you talk through why they're in here and why end rough sleeping is not one of these objectives?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a fair question. I mean, I stand by what I said in the manifesto, but sometimes when you write manifestos, you're doing it without the support of the experts that we have in a building like this. But I stand by that goal, ending rough sleeping by 2020. Obviously, when officers, civil servants get hold of manifestos, they say, well, actually, you know, you just need to, you know, it's like, yes, Minister, I've been there in my past before, you know the situation. And they were saying technically it's accurate to say end the need for, because you can't, you know, unless you're going to have a policy of forcing people off the streets, then, you know, it's not right to say end rough sleeping. So, I mean, to be honest, I'm quite happy to, and I will, and I do if I'm interview, you know, I stand by the commitment. I would like to end rough sleeping. But I recognise that there are people who will choose not to come in and use a bed every night. There will be. But, you know, if we get the numbers right down and people say I've failed because they're in double figures rather than three figures, I'll say, well, that's a failure that I'm happy to, you know, to accept. I mean, I still use the language that I stood for election on. But I do reckon you're right to pick up that there is a subtle change there in the way that it's presented by the combined authority, and that they would say it's because technically that is a more correct thing to say.
I've had plenty of hands already. Councillor Robinson, let's start with you, please.
Thank you, Chair. On that one about ending rough sleeping, there is what we call you carry on. We might sort out these young people now and people with mental ill health, but in the background, you've got young people coming up that have problems within their own families, and they'll be the future ones that'll be homeless. So to be realistic, as much as we try, and I've been with Andy from day one on this project, you will always get a small element that will not want to co-act with us. There'll be the new ones coming up when we get the other ones sorted out. There will always be that element. That's on that one. On the other bit as well, it's regarding red tape. I don't know how many other councils have red tape, but with the austerity cuts and how many officers each council has lost through cuts through their boroughs, we've lost officers through whether it's early retirement or taking redundancies. We've lost some of our best officers because they've been there a long time, so they've took early retirement. We now found we've got young officers, and they are experienced officers and they are dedicated, but it's the red tape of trying to get these homeless people into accommodation can take longer than it should, and that's one of my problems that I want to deal with locally, that there will be a time when a young person, we want to get into accommodation, but it's taking longer than it should. Excuse me, longer than it should. And I've got another issue regarding around disabled people. And I know on the bus networks that we literally can't tell them, we can ask them what to do, we can't tell them what to do. But I'll give you an example, Oxford Road. Now that is just a bus lane and a taxi lane. But if you're trying to get to Christie's from the other side of Manchester for chemotherapy, you only know one route, and that's down Oxford Road. There is no information about what route people can take to get to somewhere like Christie's if you can't use Oxford Street, and the money that's coming into Manchester City Council because of the fines, that needs to be signposted a lot better than it is. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that?
I think I better leave Councillor Sadler to this answer for Manchester City Council. No, I think the first point you made, I absolutely think is right, Councillor Robinson. I think this doesn't just apply to this group of people who are the current rough sleepers. There's going to, the nature of life now is so precarious in terms of people's work and people's housing and mental health is obviously such a, homelessness is effectively a mental health issue. Because I think many of the people are homeless because of mental health challenges, but actually one night out on the streets damages your mental health. So if you didn't have mental health problems before, you will have them. So it is effectively a mental health issue. So I agree with you, and I think what we're trying to build here is a system that isn't just a temporary, this system will need to be there, I think. We need to be a place that believes in prevention, that catches people as soon as they fall and tries to put them straight back on their feet, because in the end, that's probably better for public budgets anyway. And if you think about entrenched rough sleepers, that kind of multiple calls on public services where their problems aren't being solved, A&E or police custody or whatever it might be, it isn't an efficient way anyway. It's not the right thing to do by them as human beings, but it's not efficient. So we've got to build a system here that is about quickly picking people up and quickly putting people back on their feet, because if you do that, and actually the emerging evidence from A Bed Every Night is that is what is happening. I want to commend Rochdale, if I may, for the way in which you've enthusiastically supported it. The figures I have say that 19 people are accommodated in Rochdale through A Bed Every Night. It's the second highest of our 10 boroughs, and the team here are very much are praising very much that you clearly are taking an interest in it, because it's obvious from the figures and the feedback that we're getting. I do think you're making an interesting point about the capacity of local government and the knowledge that comes with being experienced in local government, and that is just a reflection of the way the world of local government has had to change in recent years. And it's not about, I don't see anything that we do here is about takeover or anything. It's about partnership, isn't it? Us doing things together. But I do think we can maybe add value to what you're trying to do as elected members if we can bring the expertise that sits here. Because we do have some very knowledgeable people within this building. And we do have perhaps more connection with housing providers all over Greater Manchester. And one thing we are trying to build through our work in rough sleeping is pairing up local authorities. If we come across somebody in a shelter who is actually from somewhere, kind of starting to help share and manage the system across GM. So, I think the points you make are very good ones. And I think the challenge we've got as we learn about how this system is working, how do we make it financially sustainable in the long term? And obviously, I will keep updating the committee on that point. And Oxford Road fines, maybe I'll leave to Simon and
Maybe that sounds like a specific case. If you wanted to talk generally about encouraging drivers in different directions, please go ahead, but maybe a specific case of Councillor Robinson may have had a fine that she's upset about. You may choose to discuss that separately.
So to take the example of Oxford Road, what we did working with the City Council over recent years down Oxford Road was to look to strike a better balance between the traffic through the Oxford Road corridor itself and the traffic on parallel routes, particularly Upper Brook Street. So what we have looked to do in order to support the university and the wider kind of public realm agenda through Oxford Road was to specifically establish Oxford Road itself as a bus, taxi and cycling corridor. But in doing that, we did work very closely with the City Council to make sure that there was a very strong signage policy in place around the use of Upper Brook Street. Councillor Robinson's raised an important point. Clearly, in terms of access to the Christie Hospital. So I'll certainly take that away and talk to City Council colleagues to see if there are any additional signage issues that we need to pick up there.
Okay, Councillor Morgan next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, still with the homeless, and the work you've been doing, you'll be measured by that, because obviously it's one of your things that you stood on and you've really won with. But the trouble we have is the public's perception. We know, we're privy to the information, we get the information from you, but the feedback, certainly within Bolton, is they feel that the issue is becoming worse. Now, they look at beggars and they assume they're automatically homeless. I mean, there are different things. But so how are you going to crack that perception? How are we going to sort of drive that down so the public start to feel it? And the other thing as well, you touched on it slightly about trams and the guided pathway and stuff. Obviously, that's great for the boroughs that have it. Obviously, Bolton was beneficiary of that £48 million transport centre, but we still got the same rubbish buses going in and the same rail service going out of it. So it's how we crack that as well. So we've got a lovely shiny building, but there doesn't seem to be much going in and out. So really, my biggest question, though, is that perception that people have, because there do seem to be more people on the streets begging, people assuming that are homeless. So how are we going to drive that down so the public start believing us as local politicians and you as the mayor?
Yeah, it's a very, very fair question again. And I think there is an issue where the public conflate true rough sleeping with what they see during the daytime, and the two aren't the same things. As you may know, I do a walk around the city centre every 3 months. The picture that you see very early in the morning is not the same as what you see mid-morning. Increasingly, I had noticed people arriving when I was on my walk around. It's not being harsh to say that there is a problem with organised begging, possibly linked to spice. I think we've got to be honest about that. I think that a bed every night is the key, though, to helping you unlock those two, separate those two things. If we don't have enough places for people to go, it's very hard to give the message to the public to say, look, don't give on the street because it doesn't, because they will say, well, hang on a minute, you're not looking after them, so someone's got to do, you would get that kind of response. I think as we build this system, I think we can be clearer and clearer with the public that a pound given to that system that brings all the warmth, the safety, the add-on support is a pound better spent actually than necessarily given. People still got to make their own choices, and it's a difficult thing. But I do think it allows more of a separation between the two issues, and I hope will enable us to say that if people, it doesn't mean that people are homeless if they are sitting begging. But this is early days, and I agree with you. It was a massive challenge to take on, but I do believe it's the right thing for us to be doing, because it is about, people have remarked on saying, well, you can't go to Manchester now without. So it does affect the kind of sense of this place and our values, and I think what we're doing is groundbreaking. No other city's trying it, but it's the right thing to try and do, both in terms of helping people, but also the image then of the place and what it stands for and how it deals with these things. It will remain really complex, and I think as I was indicating to the chair, I still think some will say when it comes to the election time, well, you said, and there's this, and it's going to be hard to say definitively, I said, and it's the nature of the issue. But I think I will be able to point to quite a significant amount of progress, and I think we already can, to be honest. And it's not all about what I've done or what people here have done. It's the partnership. I keep wanting to stress that. It's the partnership with the 10 districts, and we're really grateful to you all for the way in which you've kind of come to this as one system. Your second point is also fair, and I'm always conscious as obviously a resident of the Wigan borough that Bolton and Wigan feel, not just feel, they are a bit shortchanged when it comes to our transport system. The Lee Galley busway has helped, but it's not particularly accessible. Atherton has got the V2 service, which obviously is not so far away. But as you say, Bolton has got the new interchange. But yeah, train services, well, that's true, but still I'm trying. You know, I think Bolton residents have just been suffering abominable treatment, to be honest, at the hands of the rail industry. The line is being electrified, I'm told. I think it is already electrified, I think. They've now testing it, aren't they? And it's up and running. I think the new trains will enter service next month. Transpennine are delayed, but I don't think the northern services are delayed. So, well, that's what we're told, isn't it? And it's always hard with the rail industry because you get told these things, and then, but it's imminent. Let me say that it is imminent. But that won't solve everything, and we got £67 million in the budget. The recent budget, which was very welcome, and grateful to the government for providing that. So this is essentially another allocation from the Transforming Cities Fund. Effectively, I think I'm right in saying funding it at the level that it was given to us originally. Is that right? We got about 240 million for 4 years, and 3 years. Yeah, so it's almost like an extension of, and you'll know that we gave them the majority to to Chris Boardman, cycling and walking. But there is now an extra fund here that comes in I'm going to get my figures wrong here, 22, 23. And what I'm thinking is that should be a fund that possibly could help with the spatial framework, you know, where there's a legitimate call for specific public transport improvement, that those communities, that there's a give back to those communities. So, for instance, it could be a new Metrolink stop, it could be a park and ride, it could be a new rail station, it could be a whole range of things, it could be a guided bus system. I want to work with leaders and districts to say, well, you know, what are the projects that could be funded through that fund that then, you know, help make the next iteration of the spatial framework look fairer and feel more doable. Because bear in mind, we've got the Clean Air Challenge coming very quickly down the track. And we need to be able to demonstrate that we're not just going to clean up the air now, but we'll be able to have clean air in the future. And if we're building houses with no access to public transport, that isn't a good option. So, Bolton, you know, I recognise the point that you're saying, and I think that you will be able to work with us on that funding, and if there are specific improvements that are needed, you know, I think it's an opportunity to bid as part of that.
What 3 things has your Transport Board achieved so far?
What are the top 3? So we've got a mayoral transport board which meets in this room, and the idea of it was to have one conversation about public transport in Greater Manchester. So these bodies that are not currently accountable to us, Highways England, Network Rail, the train operating companies, that was the aim of it. So what has it achieved so far? I would say the major thing it's probably achieved is an acceleration of the whole consideration of rail capacity in central Manchester. That's what Network Rail reported to the last meeting. The problems on the railway system across the north of England are intrinsically linked to the lack of capacity in central Manchester. You probably know this, you probably see it, feel it yourselves. But the Ordsall Cord has not been sort of matched with the extra investment through Deansgate, Oxford Road, Piccadilly. And there was a year ago, there was a kind of denial that that was an issue. We were told digital technology would solve it. You know, we could have all of these new trains going through and we would maximize their paths through digital technology. Now, we were doubtful about that, and I think we've been proven right. So now there is an expedited piece of work underway to look at that corridor, and it's due to report early in the new year. And I don't think that would have happened without the mayoral Transport Board. I wouldn't want to overclaim for it. What it is doing is just getting coordination. It's giving early notice of. We highlighted the issue with the Regent roadworks and the clash with the smart motorway. I don't think we would have got on top of that as quickly. Is that fair, Simon? If we hadn't have had, it was a bit of a, we were in this room when somebody said, "Oh, hang on a minute, we're doing smart motorway." It was like, you know, it was like a, but it. I suppose it's achieving that at least, even though we weren't able to change at least it was flushing out that there was going to be an issue. So that would be another thing that I would point to. I think we are higher in the minds of all of the bodies, because they have to come to that meeting. That's maybe the third thing I would say. They are thinking about us more. They are thinking, right, what good news have we got for Greater Manchester when we come? I wouldn't want to overclaim. It's had three meetings, and I would say the Castlefield thing is an output. I would say HS2 Northern Powerhouse Rail as well. I think there's a lot of focus work going on now to get that solution right. But I think the big achievement is the whole of the transport industry is now starting to sort of recognise that there's a change here, that they're having to sort of think differently about how they deal with us. And you know, it's early days, but I hope that will only grow over time. But it's, again, I would hope next time, Chair, you ask me that question, I'll be able to point to much more tangible, specific things.
I look forward to it. I asked the residents of my ward, I told them I was coming to talk to you today, and asked them which questions I should ask, and it was rough sleeping and why is my train not running on time? And you've addressed both of those in different ways. Yeah. I've got Councillor Wissam next, please.
Yeah, just to go back to the homelessness, really. Obviously, I applaud the bed every night work and the you know, the focus on getting a roof over people's head. But it was more sort of thinking about prevention, really. And I suppose, obviously, you know, the main drivers of homelessness are a central government policy and the welfare cuts and welfare reforms that have come in over the last 8 years. But there are some elements of the welfare system that we do have power over at a local authority level, like discretionary housing payments and council tax support and local welfare assistance schemes. And the question really is sort of how confident are you that the local authorities are maximising their abilities to prevent homelessness in the first place? One of the things with the local welfare assistance schemes, which are meant to be the first port of call for people facing a crisis, each of the 10 boroughs operates a scheme, which isn't true of local authorities in other parts of the country. Some choose not to, but they vary massively from one local authority in GM to the next, both in terms of the amount of funding that goes in, but also in terms of the numbers of people supported through the schemes and the type of support you can get. So some of the schemes in GM provide people with cash, with money, so grants or loans. Some are quite restrictive, so you might get energy vouchers through the scheme. So it's a real kind of hodgepodge sort of approach across GM. So just a question about whether we're kind of maximising things into the preventative side of it. And then another sort of quick one was just around the, you said about sort of being held to account and also wanting to get more powers from the centre, or, you know, and just how strong do you think the collective GM voice is at the moment in terms of calling on central government for more powers? It links a bit back to my question about kind of welfare powers. I think collectively across GM, the population kind of gets the argument around kind of powers over the transport system because they're dealing with that sort of chaos every day. But I feel in other policy areas, actually, there isn't kind of that strong collective voice. So it's not a criticism of you as kind of the individual, but more that kind of, does the public, does civic society, do all the 10 leaders kind of give heft to kind of that voice from you that's saying, actually, we might need more powers over these other areas of policy?
Really good questions. Answer, Chair. I think on your first question, we have had that discussion in the GM Reform Board about what more we can do to prevent homelessness. So the DWP do come to our meeting, and they have suggested more data sharing around people maybe at risk of sanctions, so that local government can take action to have more early warning, and therefore can look at all available ways of supporting people to prevent homelessness. So that has come through, and you know, I think Salford were particularly behind the drive for that, and I think it was. I think I'm right in saying that that's where it was. It was done first, but I think we need to build to build on that. I mean, obviously, it's hard for councils, isn't it, in the current environment to to strengthen what's being done. But I think we do maybe need a bit of a review of where, you know, because sometimes providing that support can actually save money, can't it? And I think this is what I was saying about rough sleeping before in a bed every night. You know, sometimes that bit of money is better spent than waiting for a much bigger problem. So I'd be interested in maybe doing a review about that. On the second, well, just one thing where I think we do need to be very specific is I'd be keen to work with you all on a guarantee to care leavers. I think one area where we can be very specific about where we have an obligation to provide consistent and good standard support, I think should be young people leaving the care system. Rochdale, I think, were the first to offer the, or certainly the first that I was aware of, the freedom from council, you know, the exemption from council tax till 25. And I think nearly all of our boroughs now, I think, have followed. What we want to do is take that principle and put it into a GM care leavers guarantee, so that wherever they are in Greater Manchester, they know that there's a basic level of support. Now, that won't be all for councils to fund, by the way, because some of it could be for the healthcare. I was told recently that Oldham Council received a motion from a care leaver around free prescriptions, which is an interesting one, because this person was saying to us that they had to choose between their prescriptions and they couldn't, you know, they couldn't fund both, and their food. And that's an idea I think the health partnership needs to take. Yeah. Yeah, this individual, the lad who came to talk about it, I think he was the one who presented the motion, had mental health problems, so he couldn't afford the antidepressants, he was saying. So there's that. And actually, more broadly, it might be guaranteeing a job to care leavers. So can our public bodies create enough apprenticeships from amongst us to, you know. So I think there's something more we can do there of ourselves. On your last point about the Greater Manchester system speaking with one voice, we're heading towards a comprehensive spending. I think we're doing pretty well, to be honest, given that the noise of Brexit. I think we're still just about getting heard. And I do work with other mayors, by the way. So with the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, I issued a joint call last week for Transport Powers and was on the Today programme making that case. But I think we need to think carefully as a GM system. Thanks very much. Thank you. About thanks, Susan. About the next spending review. So that's coming up next year. We can't ask for everything. You know, as ever, you've got to be selective in what we actually ask for. My feelings are that we should probably make a case for much more substantial DWP devolution. Because if we look at our locality teams that are increasingly working in a place-based model, nearly all of the people they're dealing with have DWP issues, but they often can't get a quick decision in the same way that they're working from the DWP. And I think, building on the success of the Working Well pilot that we've had, which is tremendous actually, I think we need to build a case for, I think DWP devolution would fill in our jigsaw, if you like, at the local level, and would bring a lot of public money into the GM model that we then could use in a more joined up way to support individuals. So perhaps it's a DWP partnership of the kind that we got with the health service, where it's maybe a halfway, no, maybe not straight to full devolution, because they may feel nervous about that. But if we can agree a proposal, then I think if all councils could get behind it and all parties could get behind it, then I think we could make a pretty powerful case to the government. The other one I would pull out would be skills. We're heading towards a local industrial strategy that I mentioned earlier. It won't succeed, in my view, unless there is a local skills strategy behind it. We need the ability now to steer our young people towards those key sectors of the economy which we think are going to be big in GM's future. If we don't have any control over the apprenticeship levy and post-16 funding, then I don't think we're going to be able to get a skills system to support our industrial strategy. So I would pull out those two things. And if we communicate that clearly, if we agree that amongst all of us, the 10 councils and this GMCA, if we agree that nice and early, our lobbying effort will get better, won't it? Because we all know the script then. Whenever we get the chance to make the case, we'll all be saying, we want DWP devolution, we want skills devolution. and then I think our voice will be heard if we go about it in a very, very structured way.
I'm going to take the last two questions from Councillors Birch and Dutton together because the Mayor is promised elsewhere. So Councillor Birch first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, it's about the rough sleeping and homelessness. I'm trying to be as brief as possible. I was born in Ukraine and raised in Ukraine, and I've never seen a homeless person in my life until I came here 22 years ago. And I still, walking past homeless people, it just moves me to the core that in the fifth, sixth richest economy we are seeing it, and Ukraine was not a very wealthy country. We'd never had homeless people. So, and also Paul Dennett is our mayor. It's his brief. He's responsible for that. So that's close to all of our hearts in Salford. What I've noticed in our ward of Ordsall, St. Clement's Church is not a large church, but they decided they were so desperate to help the homeless people in winter especially. They opened the foyer of their church and put 10 or 12 beds there for winter. And the congregation is about 50 people, but it is working obviously for those 10, 12 people who are not sleeping on the freezing pavement. And I'm seeing also the Embassy Bus, the great project where an A-listers touring bus is converted to the sleeping. 14, I believe it is, beds are provided with some curtains, providing some kind of, privacy. And there are so many examples of the third sector providing really small when we look at the Greater Manchester scale or national scale help. However, that is so significant for the local people. And I've heard from research done about homelessness that it is the fourth R, the reconnection, that they might access food, clothing, and we see a plate. Tonight I saw a plate full of rice on the floor next to a lady who was begging. Possibly bed, clothing, food is quite actually abundant, but it is the ones that even get a bed. There is no community, and it's a completely new, isolating way, and people often consciously go back into rough sleeping because there is some kind of community there. So my question is, because third sector has got their heart and mind in the right place, they have for years, toward the rough sleeping, are we engaging? I'm sure we are, I know we are engaging, but are we engaging in a strategic level, and are we possibly providing some seed funding for them to empower them to help in a great capacity? As we know, Salford Council had 50% of budget reduction. We can't pay now for officers to, their sick leave, holiday leave, and all that. We just can't pension contributions, but there are so many volunteers or third sector groups that with a small seed of funding, I guess it would be donation, we would be able to enable them to support so many homeless people with the third R, the reconnection, providing community, family, environment for them so that they are supported, valued, helped, in a home-like way, in a homely atmosphere, so to speak, together with the agencies that will provide training and possibly employment. Are we strategically connecting with the third sector and empowering them to help us and the homeless?
Thank you. Councillor Dutton.
Thank you, Charles. I'll try and be brief. This time last year I was in London, and there was a seller on a corner selling the big issue. He apologised because it was £3 in the Christmas issue. And I soon noticed he had a Chorley accent. And I asked him the question, how do you find yourself in this actual situation in London? Personal problems, had a job in London, and he was 1 month into work when he was evicted because he couldn't pay his rent because he'd lost his job very, very quickly on the streets. So, like he said, you're one check away from being homeless. And it's the old adage, isn't it? And very quickly spiral down. But I did say to him, I said, well, there's jobs advertised. I've just come down Oxford Street, casual labour required, apply within. And his response was, I've tried many, many a time, but because I have no fixed abode, they will not employ me. I just wondered what was in place in Manchester, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Councillor Birch put it very well, I think. It was very, it should be a never event. If, it shouldn't really happen in a country as rich as ours. It just shouldn't be the case, really, that anyone, and I think that's what we're trying to do here, to say that that isn't what is going to happen. We are rich enough to look after everybody. And to answer your question very directly, that is what the Greater Manchester Homelessness Action Network is all about. It is essentially, as Councillor Robinson will confirm, a network of voluntary organisations who are able to help us with the policy, but also access the funding that is available through the public funds that we have here, obviously the funds that councils hold, the Mayor's Homelessness Fund, and some of them have received money through that. Big Change, and then the new one that Vincent Company's launched, Tackle for Manchester. So they can access the funding that is there in the system, if you like, and they are very much centrally involved. The thing I was really keen to in creating the network was, stop the competitiveness sometimes you get in the voluntary sector, where one's and the kind of, this problem's bigger than all of us. We all need to pull together in a strategic way, to answer your point, to tackle it. And actually, it isn't going to be a kind of an old style approach of public money and a public strategy and, just throw in taxpayers' money. There isn't enough taxpayers' money, as we know, to deal with it. So it is about unlocking the contribution of all sectors. And as part of the Homelessness Action Network, we have a business network, which is chaired by Tim Heatley of Capital and Centric, and is increasingly doing some really good, bringing in some significant funding, and also offers of help on that reconnection thing. So I've tasked Tim to find companies who will take people who've been recently homeless. So, that becomes their contribution. If they will take people who are coming through housing first and then give them that job and then give it on a secure basis so they can get the home. And so, you are absolutely, the way you put it is absolutely right. It is what we're trying to do. It's work in progress. I'm not going to claim we're there yet, but we're definitely getting there. And it is impressive, really. And I don't think any other city in the UK, Glasgow's doing good work, Bristol, London to a degree, but nowhere is doing as much as we're doing. But I hope what we're doing puts a pressure on those other places to do the same, because people will say, if you can do it, well, why can't we do it? And there'll be a kind of pressure that builds then on other places. Well, I certainly hope so. I think I do need to put on record my thanks, Chair, to the City Mayor of Salford, Paul Dennett, who has led the housing and homelessness brief incredibly well and passionately. Salford are top of the Bed Every Night league. They are the highest performer. But as I say, all authorities are working well behind it. Councillor Dutton's point is the point, I think, is the crucial thing that people don't realise. We are, all of us, just a few bits of bad luck. And I have seen all walks of life out on those streets. Yes, there are a lot of care leavers. Yes, sadly, there are ex-forces. And that just shouldn't happen, shouldn't it? Anyone who served our country in that capacity should, anyway, but there are. However, I've met a GP, an ex-GP, homeless. On my last walkabout, I came across a young woman 6 months pregnant who was spending her first night out. It's not possible to generalise and say it's just this type of person or just all people, and that tells you something. It tells you that modern life has become too insecure. Work isn't secure anymore for people, i.e. it's not permanent fixed hours, it's 0 hours for some people. So if you're on 0 hours, you don't know that you can pay the rent every week, and then you're at risk. And with more people in private rented, Paul Dennett has pointed to the rise in what are called no-fault evictions, which is a problematic concept, I think, where private landlords can evict pretty quickly. That is the single biggest cause of homelessness at the moment, evictions from private rented accommodation in Greater Manchester. And I think it was Councillor Whittam's point before, that it's for people like that gentleman you met who's maybe not working enough hours or has lost their job, there isn't any stopgap for them anymore to sort of then say, well, how can they then cover themselves off for a couple of weeks while they find another job? It's scarily easy to fall right down into those doorways very, very quickly. That's the nature of modern society, isn't it? And I think we've got to get better at doing something. I wonder whether our credit unions might be able to help us a little more. You know, whether bridging finance we could find an arrangement with them of helping, you know, small grants to get people through that gap in universal credit coming through or whatever, you know, and that's something that I think needs to be developed alongside that early warning system. But the points that colleagues have made, Chair, are all really powerful points. We are still on a learning experience here with this whole policy. We definitely can't say to you, we know we've got it all completely right, because we're changing it all the time. We're learning. We need the feedback from you. But if we carry on building it in that way, then I think it's got more chance of, in the end, becoming a proper answer to the whole issue.
Thank you very much. I think pretty much everybody around the table had about 8 or 9 other questions that they wanted to ask. But you're due to go and see the Youth Combined Authority, and we really don't want to keep you from them. So thank you very much. We've had an hour of your time. Thank you. I'm going to move us on to item 7, which is the work programme. Susan, is there anything in particular you'd like to draw our attention to there?
No, I mean, it's pretty much as the report actually just sets out. December's items are as is there. We're waiting to see whether or not the young people's travel item is going to be coming. You will look at it prior to GMCA decision. That's the assurance you have as far as there. And we're just, you know, again, can we just say if anyone's got anything in particular that they would wish to be picked up on the work programme, if you notice it on the Register of Key Decisions or anything else, we would really welcome your input there.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Susan. If nobody's got any questions or comments on item 7, I'm going to ask Councillor Davis if he... Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, item 8 is the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan, update on local air quality modelling. We've had a report as part of the papers, which was mostly for noting, but we do have some officers here who might be able to address particular questions or concerns. This committee is going to hear much more on this subject, as you would expect. Specifically, the plan that will go to the combined authority, so to leaders and the mayor in January, will come to us before it goes to them. So we will have a look, we'll be doing some pre-decision scrutiny and having a look at what the plan is to address this issue. You will have all read your papers. Does anybody have a particular question or comment on this? I know briefings have taken place in the 10 boroughs because we in Stockport had ours last night. Councillor Dutton.
It's just a comment, Chair. Obviously, local businesses in Rochdale and certainly garages that sell vehicles, they're being hit with the recession and the austerity measures as well. And a lot of the business people are actually expressing their point of view that the delay in this pollution coming into play, they're not selling diesel cars. And I'm obviously, that, you know, officers will be well aware of that. So the sooner a decision is made, if diesel vehicles within Manchester are going to be restricted, it is affecting business. I just put that as a comment rather than a question.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dutton. I wonder if one of you might want to talk about any lobbying work that's going on with government about some of these issues, scrappage scheme and that kind of thing.
Certainly, Chair, thank you. So the report sets out a series of very specific asks that leaders have been clear that they require from government, and the Mayor has had dialogue with the Secretary of State for Environment on the issues, and I think we're confident at this stage that we've had quite a positive hearing in terms of that. So just briefly to reiterate the key elements that we are focused on in that regard. Firstly, leaders are very clear that if we're required to deploy all of the Clean Air Plan toolkit as set out in the report, that we would expect to be supported by government to establish appropriate scrappage arrangements, and those arrangements may well be designed somewhat differently depending on whether we're talking about commercial vehicles or whether we're talking about individual cars. And we're on at the moment with designing some options that we're going to review with government officials as quickly as we can. Secondly, we made a very clear request of government for clarity on how we might expect Highways England to work under any Clean Air Plan that we bring in. As members will be abundantly aware, the motorway network is centrally part of the highway system in Greater Manchester, but not our highway system. And therefore we need the support of government to be able to establish the right conditions around the motorway network. Again, very positive hearing from the Secretary of State, and we understand that arrangements are to be made so that we can sit down collectively as city regions with Highways England to address that issue. And then the third issue is to ensure that government is making sufficient provision for what is likely to be a sizable funding requirement in order to address the issue. And we shouldn't overlook that these are real public health issues that we need to address here. Again, a very positive hearing, and very much the reason why it's important that we reach quite a high degree of clarity in terms of what we are looking for from government as we sign off the outline Clean Air Plans towards the end of January. And I think we are now, certainly at this stage, feeling more positive that government is ready to hear and work with us on that. But the clock is ticking, and therefore we will need government to respond very quickly to the Clean Air Plans once submitted.
Well, I'm pretty sure we all admire your optimism on that last point, Simon. A question from me. Last night in Stockport, we had our presentation from officers and from some of the local team who were working on this project, and we had the map, and there were some specific roads with coloured in red, some are coloured in amber. And my question was around if a road is not yet coloured in, does that mean there is no problem with the quality of the air, or does it mean that we do not yet have data showing that there is a problem? And the reason for my question is because there are some roads in there where adjoining roads are, well, as a user of those roads, are at least as bad. And so, first of all that, but then secondly, what work is going on to get even more data to feed into this?
It's a very good question, Chair. So the maps are based on the best assessment that we can undertake with a combination of the data and the transport models that we have available to us. And certainly we've looked to make sure that we've drawn on national experts to help us in that regard. And the government's own appointed panel of academics who have then reviewed our work have told us that they think that it's a very robust piece of work that we've undertaken. So within the data we have, the very best assessment, but the point's very well made that the data, that the sources of data are still limited. And so there is further work for the validation work that we are now undertaken around the localities that we've identified within the map, so that we can ensure that we continue to work on the very best real-time data that we have. And as part of the Clean Air Plan, we would anticipate deploying an appropriate future network of monitoring equipment so that we can make sure that we are testing ourselves against what's actually realised on the ground, as opposed to numbers that are generated through economic models.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whittam.
Yeah, it was just a follow on to that. So we had the same presentation in Trafford a few weeks back. It's just about, can you sort of model likely sort of future congestion levels in areas and therefore poor air quality, and can you model the impact of interventions on congestion levels, so you know, public transport intervention or another intervention area, to kind of give you a sense of okay, what impact that has on congestion and therefore air quality?
Yeah, so the map that's included in the report at Appendix 3 is our modelled expectation of air quality exceedances in 2021. And what we use to assess that is firstly the traffic models and the transport models that we have within TFGM. So they have within them our understanding in terms of any development that will have undertaken in any localities by that point, our understanding of the performance of the road network, any investment in the transport system which is already in the pipeline, and also our understanding of the vehicle fleet profile that operates around Greater Manchester. Then we also put in a series of physical conditions as well. So the weather conditions, which is the reason why you will see that there is actually less of a footprint in the southwest of the conurbation. In relative terms to the northeast of the conurbation, there's a prevailing wind that blows in through the Cheshire Gap across Greater Manchester, and it's shaped some decisions for a long time actually in Greater Manchester. There's also the issue of the built form in different locations. So part of the reason why we have a greater concentration of pollution around the regional centre is because we have taller buildings around the regional centre, and pollution gets trapped in tall buildings. The scientists call it a canyon effect that takes place in those locations. All of that information, all of the background information that we have on pollution in Greater Manchester is all put into the modelling activity.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Simon. Item 9 is the Register of Key Decisions, which is just for colleagues to note. Date and time of next meeting, the last one of our calendar year, colleagues, 13th of December, 10:30 in this room. Thank you very much indeed.